Welcome to the Dark Ozarks. We are exploring the darker side of Christmas time. We want to remind you that the Dark Ozarks podcast is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or just about any other podcast platform. So what's so dark about Christmas time? What's not to celebrate?
Well, of course, it's the celebrations and sometimes the shenanigans that can be the issue, and of course, where they came from. You have things like Saturnalia, Belsnickel, mummer parades.
Not all flowers, floats, and marching bands?
Well, it's a lot of pranks, sometimes violence, and occasionally even murder underneath the mistletoe.
Well, we'll discuss the dark history of what you thought was fun and games, but first we want to invite everyone to like, follow, etc. Dark Ozarks on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Plus, we encourage you to follow the podcast. While you are on Facebook, you can subscribe to the private Dark Ozarks subscribers group. Why, you may ask? Yes, it does have a small subscription fee, but you receive exclusive content and behind-the-scenes info that you don't get anywhere else. It also helps us bring more original content to Dark Ozarks. You can click the subscribe button on the page. You will have to log in since there is a payment, and we appreciate everyone.
And now you can get Dark Ozarks t-shirts for sale at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com.
We encourage everyone to check out Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, in person and online on Facebook and their website, alwaysbuyingbooks.com, for all of your reading needs, including a large section on the paranormal, history, and more, not to mention The Building's Haunted. Tell Bob and Elise that we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewing is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and has been twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and food in a historical building with a noir past, and yes, that building is haunted as well. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
So shenanigans and Christmas.
Christmas shenanigans. There's a very, very deep and interestingly documented history of this festival time of year. And it speaks to a lot of history, particularly in that we're specifically looking at Western civilization, specifically Europe, and its influence on North America. That includes Canada and the United States. And some of these traditions have made their way all the way to the Ozarks.
Yes, and a lot of these things will seem a bit familiar, at least in part to people, but their origins may be surprising.
Yes, and perhaps here on our short format, and for anyone who's watching the short format, we do a quick deep dive into one of our topics. We will then, we're doing this live, we will then be over on Facebook Live for an in-depth discussion of the topics. And then in about a day or so, that long format will be uploaded onto this channel here on YouTube. So hard to miss us on that. And if you are listening live, we do invite you to follow us over to Facebook. If you are not listening to us live, we invite you to check us out on Facebook, as well as subscribe, like, and share here on YouTube, and check out everything that's been uploaded, especially the long formats where we do a deep dive. Now, the really interesting thing I think we might really jump into here and possibly ruffle a few feathers is Saturnalia.
Oh, come on. It's just a solstice celebration. Lights, candles, and merriment, right?
And possibly a blood sacrifice, as well as the gladiatorial games.
Well, you have to keep the masses entertained. After all, that is why they built the Colosseum.
There's no tradition like a new tradition, and in this particular case, we're dealing with what was, from what we can tell, the most popular festival of the Roman Empire.
Yes. And for whatever Rome's image is, it was rather tame until they revived the even more ancient version of it from Greece.
Yes. And that first of all, I think that the cultural interplay between Greek culture to Roman culture, and in the case of present day Italian peninsula, the underlying Etruscan culture that's had influences upward into the strata, into the religious and cultural strata, is very, very interesting. You also have, surprisingly, Celtic influence, because there were at various times during the early days of Rome, you had Celtic tribes that were actually quite prolific on the southern side of the Alps, and then later, as the Roman Empire became much more powerful, the Celts were still making their presence known from the north side of the Alps, often, and this of course gets overlooked in the annals of war, often in terms of commerce and in terms of trade over the mountains, but then of course also in war, and occasionally in an attempt of just a full out essentially genocide in various places.
And sacking Rome.
Yes, and Delphi in 271 BC, which
that's true.
is an interesting aspect. But something that really struck me in terms of our research for Saturnalia is that school is closed, courts closed, the gym's closed. They had lots of candles. They gave everyone gifts. There was lots of parties with lots of food. There's a very real human aspect that we would recognize in these people. Even though it's 2,000 years ago.
Very true. Very true. And it only took a war for it to get nasty. Second Punic War, one of the worst defeats Rome received at the hands of Carthage. And so suddenly the festival got a little bloodier in an attempt to regain status and power with the gods, basically.
Yes, and Saturn was a good place to start.
Yes. Well, and a lot of people would find a parallel perhaps to the more recent Christmas time and Christian traditions in that you have the theme of a God giving himself for the good of the world.
Right. And something that we really see beginning around AD 336, I believe, with Constantine, in terms of essentially ordering Christianity to become the state religion. And we see very consistently, we see it with most of our major holidays. There was an overlay and an overlap of various elements of new Christian theology, looking for festivals to pair them up with, essentially, to make this new state religion at the time more palatable and understandable and recognizable and acceptable to the citizens.
True. And one thing that a lot of people don't really understand, even with that, is that because when Constantine recognized Christianity, it did not sweep away the older gods either. They coexisted.
Right. And there's that the elements of Saturnalia became rather perhaps diffused across several aspects of festivities, but have, interestingly enough, continued to this day. We see, of course, the this season as a festival of light, lighting of candles, giving of gifts, celebrating of abundance. One of the things I find interesting is a lot of these Saturnalia carnival aspects seems to have been encapsulated into the Renaissance in Venice, and then retranslated to particularly into North America by way of essentially the Catholic influences, the Catholic settlements, the French settlements and the Spanish settlements heavily, and of course we really recognize this on the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico coast, with the center point being, of course, New Orleans, but these Carnival and Mardi Gras celebrations that are not confined to New Orleans, but stretched throughout South Louisiana, are associated with the French and Creole culture, and are also heavily influencing on places like Mobile. Mobile has a incredible Mardi Gras celebration that oftentimes, just in terms of the larger national scope, gets overshadowed by New Orleans.
Very true, very true. But the atmosphere even goes beyond that of typical celebrations that people even not of a very religious background would observe, say highlighting the solstice and things like that all of these aspects really go back to Saturnalia.
And they do. And some things that were in more northern Europe, with some exceptions in the particular more remote areas, were largely erased by the Puritans, by the Protestant Reformation.
Yes, yeah, they tended to put a kibosh on a few things.
Lord of Misrule was out.
Yes. And if you're wondering what the Lord of Misrule is, we'll talk about it in the long format. So look for it tomorrow night.
Or meet me in person.
That's a whole nother story.
Yes. Yes. As we were going over some of these notes, I was going, well, recognize myself there, and there too, and there too. Oh, look, and then there was wine. Okay, I'm good.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, is that it was a time of merriment, celebration, actually very much of equality and a bit of satire and mockery, where those that did not have much power in society were on even keel during the festival. And so I think it served a lot of different social purposes to help everyone get along for the rest of the year.
I agree, and very much a turning things temporarily upside down.
Exactly. And on that note, we will sign off here. And but we want to remind you to check out upcoming events and merchandise at darkozarks.com, if I can talk, and paranormalsciencelab.com. Thank you again to Always Buying Books and Beard Engine Brewing Company for helping bring the Dark Ozarks to everyone.
And on the next episode, we're going to be discussing Dark Tales from the Mark Twain National Forest. Catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. And thank you to everyone